In July of 1947, 30 miles north of Roswell, New Mexico, William Brazel came across some strange debris that came from an object that fell from the sky on the J.B. Foster Ranch. Debris so strange that the U.S. Army Air Force released a press statement claiming that they had captured a crashed flying saucer. This would quickly be redacted a few days later, creating one of America's greatest urban legends: an alien cover-up. In the following decades, dozens of people have come forward claiming to have laid witness to this flying saucer or its alien occupants, sometimes in a deathbed confessional. But since then, we have yet to see any real hard evidence. What really happened in Roswell in 1947? Hey buddy, my name's Gregory and welcome to Tell Me More, the series where we explore the strange and unexplained. When researching the last video, I found that it's kind of hard to think of the Men in Black without thinking of the Roswell Incident. I've been putting off discussing Roswell because I feel like it's been done a million times before. Everybody knows the story. But I came across this interesting article published in 2012. Admittedly, it was done by the Huffington Post. But it introduced a new narrative to the story that I'd never heard of before, and it took me down a brand new rabbit hole that I would love to travel down with you guys. I've actually heard the theory before that there were 2 crash sites in the Roswell incident. This is something that's floated around the UFO community for quite a while. The idea being that the debris field that they found on the ranch in Roswell was actually where the UFO first hit the ground, but it bounced back up into the air and then landed 30 miles away on a second crash site that was really covered up. But in the narrative we're going to discuss in this video, there are 2 crash sites because there were 2 UFOs. And they didn't crash. They were shot down. But before we get started, I'd like to thank today's sponsor, ExpressVPN. How did you choose your internet service provider? Why do you use that one? The truth is, most of us don't really have much of a say in which ISP we use, because ISPs tend to operate like monopolies in the regions that they serve. They then use that monopoly power to take advantage of their customers. Limited bandwidth, data caps, streaming throttles, the list goes on. But the worst part is that many ISPs log your internet activity and then sell that data to big tech companies and to advertisers. And that's exactly why I protect my devices with ExpressVPN. ExpressVPN is a simple app for your computer or smartphone that encrypts all of your network data and tunnels it through a secure VPN server, so your internet service provider can't see any of your activity. You're probably on the internet all the time. The sad truth is that every site you visit, video you watch, message you send is then logged by your internet service provider, your cell phone provider, or some other big tech giant, and then they turn around and sell your information. That's one reason why I recommend ExpressVPN as the best way to protect your online activity. After you download it, all you need to do is open the app, press the button, boom, protected. Doing this gives you a temporary IP address, and you can even change your location. All you need to do is press location, choose a new country, boom, protected. And ExpressVPN does all of this without slowing your connection. That's why it's rated the #1 VPN service by CNET, TechRadar, Wired, and more. So stop handing over your personal data to your internet service provider and other tech giants who then mine your activity and sell off your information. Protect yourself with the VPN that I trust to keep me private online. Visit expressvpn.com/skeptic to get 3 extra months for free. Click the link in the description below to support a company that supports the Armored Skeptic. In 2012, ex-Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Richard French recounted to the Huffington Post a version of the Roswell narrative that many of us may not be familiar with. Featured in their Weird News section, he claimed that there was, in fact, 2 crashes, not one involved in Roswell. The version that the retired lieutenant colonel told explained that an extraterrestrial craft was shot out of the sky by a prototype pulse beam weapon from an experimental U.S. aircraft flying out of White Sands, New Mexico. This pulse beam weapon disabled the UFO's controls, causing it to ultimately crash. Colonel French told the Huffington Post there were actually 2 crashes at Roswell, which most people don't know. The first one was shot down by an experimental U.S. airplane that was flying out of White Sands, New Mexico, and it shot what was effectively an electronic pulse-type weapon that disabled and took away all the controls of the UFO, and that's why it crashed. And he claims that the second UFO crashed while it was on a reconnaissance mission looking for the wreckage and the crew of the first crash. It would be easy to discount this guy if he was just some random veteran that nobody had heard of before, trying to spin a crazy tale to gain some notoriety before he dies. The problem is that Lieutenant Colonel French could be classified an American hero. He died in November 2014, but left behind an incredible legacy, joining the National Guard shortly after his 17th birthday, and soon after getting his commission in the U.S. Air Force became a fighter aircraft pilot. French held many university degrees, including a PhD in astrophysics and another in philosophy. In his 27-year career in the Air Force, he collected many decorations, including the Silver Star, the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Air Medal, and not one but 2 Purple Hearts. He also claims to hold the record for flying the most combat missions, and before retiring he served as an air commander at Nellis Air Force Base and Luke Air Force Base. But most interestingly of all, in an interview he gave in the Huffington Post, Richard French claims he worked for the Air Force Office of Special Investigations in 1952, while stationed in Spokane, Washington. One of his jobs during that time was to create logical explanations for UFO sightings reported to the U.S. Air Force, and in his own words claimed that he was one of the authors of Project Blue Book. So the man definitely existed and held positions of substantial rank in the Air Force. But does this lend any credibility to his character or to the claims that he's made? At the end of World War II, there was a race between the Americans and the Soviets to collect as many V-2 rockets as they possibly could. The V-2 rocket was the world's first long-range guided ballistic missile. It was powered by a liquid-propelled rocket engine and was developed by the Germans. The V-2 was also the world's first artificial object to enter space after it crossed the Kremlin line in a vertical launch in 1944. Around 300 rail cars where the V-2 rockets and parts were collected and returned to the United States, as well as 126 scientists, including Wernher von Braun and Walter Dornberger. And after the V-2 rocket arrived in New Mexico, where do you think that they took it? The White Sands Proving Ground, only 120 miles away from Roswell. This is also the location of the first ever nuclear weapons test. So I guess you could say there were a few interesting things happening in the area. So 1947 was the year that the V-2 rocket arrived in America, as well as German scientists who were recruited during Project Paperclip, which we now recognize was to get a scientific and technological advantage over the Soviets during the Cold War. This was the beginning of the space race. But a directed energy weapon in the 1940s sounds pretty far-fetched. I mean, today, as of 2021, we know that such technology can exist and that there are militaries around the world that are dedicated to developing such technology. But a directed energy weapon in 1947, that would have been considered science fiction. Right? As far back as the 1930s, rumors of engine-stopping rays began to circulate around Europe. The story is that while Germans were testing television transmitters, passing cars would create electrical interference with the television equipment. So to deal with this, sentries in Fieldsburg would stop traffic in the area for about 20 minutes to allow the test to be done. When you tell this story in the wrong order, it makes it sound like the test itself was the reason that the engines stopped. And when the British heard this in 1938, they decided to turn this narrative around on the Germans, trying to put them on a wild goose chase. So the British started a rumor that they themselves created a British engine-stopping ray, thinking that it was entirely impossible, hoping that when German scientists heard about this, that it would tie up their resources and their money. But you know what I'm gonna say next, don't you? The Germans reacted to this rumor by developing directed energy weapons and sonic weapons. In the later years of World War II, the Germans investigated X-ray beam weapons. They built a particle accelerator called a rheotron with the purpose of creating hard X-ray synchrotron beams. The intent of this was to pre-ionize ignition in aircraft engines, basically acting as a directed energy weapon and bringing aircraft down. And guess what? The rheotron was captured by the Americans in 1945, renamed the Betatron, and research and development was continued at Los Alamos Labs by Donald Kirst. But after looking into the German involvement in the creation of the Betatron, I found that the Norwegian man who developed this technology, Rolf Widor, was convinced that this technology would not be of any military significance to the Germans, and his pursuits were purely civil as he was developing the technology for cancer treatment. This was supposedly the technology that was scaled up to become a directed energy weapon. A UFO killer. Damn. An infantry officer, Colonel B. Alexander, was in this news article as well. Retired as a colonel in 1988, he had a PhD in education and spent time training officers. He was best known for being a leading advocate for the development of non-lethal weapons. That means he would know everything there is to know about early sonic weapons, directed microwave weapons, etc., many of which are used by different military and police groups around the world today. After retiring, he took a job working for Robert Bigelow, head of Bigelow Aerospace, and once owner of the Bigelow Ranch, which was also known as Skinwalker Ranch. Bigelow assigned Alexander to a group called NIDS, the National Institute of Discovery Science, in order to study and examine some of the supernatural activity that was known to happen on the property. During multiple interviews, Alexander gave credibility to the idea of supernatural and non-human intelligences. Colonel B. Alexander also wrote a book called UFOs in 2011, and it was a year later, in 2012, that Lieutenant Colonel French would claim that the United States military had directed energy weapons that they used to shoot down UFOs. But Colonel B. Alexander would end up retorting Lieutenant Colonel French's claims, saying that the entire concept was fabricated. But I have to ask the question, what was Colonel B. Alexander's motivation to comment on this claim in the first place? Why would the Huffington Post feel the need to quote him or reference him at all? Is he a disinformation agent or a gatekeeper of some sort? A year after telling the Huffington Post about directed energy weapons, in 2013, Lieutenant Colonel Richard French spoke in front of Congress during the Citizens' Hearing on Disclosure, giving testimony about his experience with UFOs. The hearing featured multiple ex-military and government officials who all wanted to push towards disclosure of these phenomenon to the public. I want to believe this gives him more credibility as a witness to UFOs in our skies. This is at least consistent with French's character, but it also makes me wonder if he isn't trying to push some sort of an agenda. The craziest part, though, is that the CIA have no records of any crashes in the Roswell area in 1947 at all, which is impossible, because we know for a fact that something crashed in Roswell in 1947. So was there some sort of a loophole, or does this indicate that there was in fact some sort of a cover-up? Well, the Government Accountability Office did a 26-page report, and according to their findings, it would seem as if the CIA documents regarding the Roswell incident were destroyed. The FBI inquired the CIA about their records on the Roswell incident. When the CIA did a search against their archives, they found that there was not a single result across any of their databases regarding Roswell. Not one. That is impossible unless someone destroyed the records. So who would have even had the authority to make a call like that? How is this even possible? To see an extension of this video describing more about the Roswell incident and what the flying saucers were people were seeing in the months leading up to the Roswell crash, head on over to my Patreon. I really want to believe that aliens are real, and the idea that they've been visiting our planet for thousands of years only to be blindsided by technology that we fumbled upon in the 1940s is so entertaining to me. But we're pretty far away from being able to believe that any of this is true. First of all, the whole death ray thing is entirely unsubstantiated. According to the book Death Rays as Lifesavers, the Germans made very little mention of this kind of technology during World War II, except for a few times near the end of the war as publicity stunts by the leadership. In 1924, English inventor Harry Grindle Matthews came the closest to achieving this effect, claiming he was able to pre-ionize engines, making them stop, and even kill small animals from a short distance. However, when the British government asked him to prove that he had achieved this, he was unable to actually demonstrate it. So he ended up moving to the United States, where he eventually sold his invention. So maybe something came of that. As for the Roswell debris, it's a bit misleading to refer to this as a weather balloon device. I assure you, this has nothing to do with monitoring the weather. This is something that hung underneath a weather balloon, but the military had good reason to hide the true purpose of this device. This likely has something to do with Project Mogul. See, in 1947, the Russians didn't have nuclear capabilities yet, but the Americans were pretty paranoid that they were figuring it out. So they ended up developing these devices that could monitor air pressure change that indicated a nuclear explosion. They would hang these sensors from weather balloons, and they looked exactly like the tinfoil style material that landed in Roswell. But this wasn't the only one that landed on American property. Another one landed on a farm in Ohio completely intact. And this time, photos made it into the news. It makes sense that the Americans wouldn't want anybody to know about this, because if we found out about it, the Russians would find out about it. The United States Air Force and the FBI both released documents explaining what Project Mogul was and its relation to the Roswell incident, so this should all be pretty cut and dry. But it isn't that easy. See, at the same time that the FBI inquired the CIA about Roswell, they also asked about Project Mogul. The CIA responded to the FBI's request by stating, "In accordance with your request, we have searched all of our databases against the terms Project Mogul and Roswell, New Mexico. The search did not yield any documents related to either of your terms." What? Tell me what you guys think. Thank you for watching. If you're new here and you love what you watch, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell now so you never miss another episode. I upload new content every Thursday. And also check out the Tell Me More playlist for hours of content to keep you entertained and thinking. Be sure to subscribe to my second channel, Armoured Gregory, where I do follow-up vlogs responding to some of my favorite comments. And I also launched a new podcast, Full Metal Tuxedo, where my co-writer Patrice and I discuss more about the kind of stuff we talk about on this show, the strange and unexplained. And of course, I have to thank my patrons and my channel members for supporting my content. I couldn't do this without you. You're amazing.